Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our monthly webinar series, and it only happens to be a special occasion. We have an in-person workshop with our colleagues from Taylor and Francis. I'm Christina Farmas. I have been working on the book initiative for the last 6 months. If you haven't received an email from me at this point asking you to write a book, it's my fault. I apologize. You're going to get one right after this meeting. I'm joined today by my colleagues who are assisting in the initiative. I'm going to start with Shelby Neely and Abby Everly and Billy Jackson. And we also have a student who has just started to work with us today, Abby. So at the university, we're pretty much focused on trying to help authors get to the finish line. So we want to be your partners in the journey from idea to ISBN. So we want to help you find a publisher, get the incentive, support services once you have a publisher with could be permissions, could be graphics, could be indexing. It depends on what you need to finish your project. And finally, once your book is ready and close to publication, we want to help you advertise. So we're here as a resource. We hope you will and meet our team and work with us often on as many books as possible. But today, we're extremely glad to have Ed, from Taylor and Francis. Ed is attending a conference today, so I thought that's a perfect opportunity. We've been talking a little bit about this idea of case studies. So how can we use some of the case studies that exist around the university? How can we create new case studies and potentially compile them into books and publish them with Taylor and Francis? So I hope, Ed, you are going to help us understand how that process works. And beyond that, we want to learn more about Taylor and Francis in general and how we can publish with either Taylor and Francis or one of your imprints. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us today. Thank you, Christina, for this great opportunity and the hospitality that Purdue have shown me while I've been here. It's been really, really great. So I'm Ed Neal. I'm publisher Taylor and Francis Books Division. Within the engineering division, my main area of focus is construction engineering, but I do have a background in social sciences. I started out working in area studies. I've also done a stint covering nursing, midwifery, and public health. So I have a fairly broad background. And I'm going to do a kind of a two-parter today. It's going to be a bit of an introduction to Taylor and Francis, tell you a bit about us, what we do, and then talk about publishing books with Taylor and Francis. And then the second part, as Christina said, he's going to focus on case studies. So I'm going to talk about why we're interested in case studies, how to write a good case study, talk about teaching notes, and then I'm going to kind of give a little bit of a teaser about the engineering case studies platform and resources that we're looking to pull together. Because this is a nice small group in the room, I think it would actually be helpful for me if I could get an idea of your backgrounds. And my apologies to those online, maybe they can drop it into the chat and I can have a look later, but I'm interested to learn what people do, and particularly if they're, this was advertised as a case study session. So if you're using case studies already, I'd be very interested to, maybe you could tell me a tiny bit about that. That's okay, so I'll start.
It was Lindsay. Yeah, so I'm Lindsay. I'm in sociology. I'm brand new to all of this. Actually, so a couple of the people in my department and we've decided let's make a teaching book, kind of like a James Lang kind of thing going on. And so I'm just here to get the basics. So yeah.
I'm Toni Brogat. I'm in the College of Education and Educational Psychology. And actually, the College of Education underwent a renovation to their teacher education program 4 years ago. We're graduating our first cohort. We've always talked about doing kind of a case of our kind of redesign, its features and principles and evaluations. So, but I'm also here as a researcher who's also interested in case study work. So I'm kind of listening with two lenses. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm Ronald. I'm in ag and biological engineering, finishing up my PhD, so I'm getting up early start.
Good to meet you. Good to meet you.
Hi, I'm Marcel, I'm a PhD student from engineering education. So our team is actively participating in a lot of book workshops headed by your team. So this, I think, is our fifth one. We started with the Purdue publisher and all the rest. So we're expanding our knowledge on book publishing, especially on a textbook for one of the graduate courses in the program. So, and this one is pretty interesting, and we would like to know more about case studies in general.
Right, okay, good. I hope you will come away with something. So as I say, this is the structure of the presentation, and I will start with the introduction. I'm hoping to get through it in 20 minutes, less than that. Have plenty of time for discussion and questions at the end. I'm really keen. We're just starting our journey into kind of exploring the case studies publishing model. I can answer many questions, I hope, about book publishing and working with us. I'm really interested in learning from you guys about case studies, what we can do to help. So I'm hoping to have a conversation at the end of this about that. So Taylor and Francis, we are one of the world's leading academic publishers. History dates back over 200 years, and you can see some of our imprints on this slide here. Routledge, CRC Press, we have Dove Press, F1000 and Piaget. These imprints span across various different disciplines, humanities, social sciences, STEM, and healthcare. And our mission is to partner with world-class authors and researchers to bring knowledge to life and to be a force for meaningful, positive change in society through our publishing. So as I said before, I represent the book side of the business, more specifically within the engineering. And I'm hoping some of you recognize some of these brands, maybe read some of our content. I can see CRC Press book there, which is great. Perhaps some of you have published with us, maybe chapters or maybe papers and journals that we publish. Some websites there if you're looking for information, but my email address is at the top of the slides and at the end as well. If you'd like to contact me and can't find what you're looking for, please do. So I'm going to jump right into an overview of the book publishing process as promised. And how do you publish a book? What's the publishing process? It all starts with an idea, and that idea needs to come and evolve into a book proposal. And most publishers have book proposal forms available on their website, so you can download, or you can reach out to a contact who can send you the form. You gather that together and send it to a commissioning editor, who will then make an initial assessment of that and give you some initial feedback. The idea is that they work with you to develop something which then goes out for review, and the editor's role is to get that proposal into a point where they believe it will do well, be a constructive process for you. The commissioning editor sends it out for review. The feedback comes in. You then take that into account, discussion with the commissioning editor, and develop it further if needed. The commissioning editor's role is then really to represent you within the publisher and take that proposal forward for approval to a publishing committee or a board. Once that happens, there'll be a contract offered. You'll agree your schedule. Publishing contracts have fairly standard terms and conditions. You agree the schedule. You agree to commit to a certain deadline. You get guidelines from the publisher on the expectations and how to submit your manuscript. And you work in consultation with them throughout the process. And that could take, from contract to submission, 12 months, 18 months, 2 years. Most publishers are very flexible in that. The manuscript is submitted. There's an initial kind of process of going through just to check things like permissions, make sure that the graphics are all in order, and then it's handed over to the production department, who would copy edit it, typeset it, and it will be proofread and sent back to you as it will look in the printed form and in the ebook form. Cover design, indexing, all that kind of stuff. And then, once that's done, in around 6 to 7 months with Taylor and Francis, the book is published in both print and ebook format. The book proposal is the most important document, which is going to inform the rest of the process. So getting that right really is going to set you in good stead for your journey in publishing a book. It's an opportunity to gather your thoughts, to present a viable project to the publisher. And as I said, most publishers will have a standard pro forma they can supply to you, 2 or 3 pages. They're going to ask you for a synopsis and a rationale. Why this book? Why now? What are you doing differently? There'll be a table of contents in there. Questions about how the book compares to competition. If you're writing a textbook, what kind of features are going to be in there to aid learning? What kind of pedagogy are you going to be? You'll need to put your timeline in. You'll need to consider sort of technical things around graphics, illustrations, equations, any kind of technical content you'll be including. Sample chapters are often helpful at this point, so that we can see your kind of your writing style. If you can't do sample chapters, no problem. It may be useful to submit a couple of journal papers if you have them, just so that you can see, and your CV as well, just so we can see your kind of track record and history. It's the opportunity for you to sell yourself, to sell your idea, but consider that as an academic publisher, Taylor & Francis, other publishers, they're interested in original quality content because they're commercial businesses and they know that quality content will sell. So ultimately, think of the quality, think of the USP when you're preparing that document, and talk to your commissioning editor. Run a few drafts by them, get that feedback. Okay, that was very quick, and I'm more than happy to go into more detail later on. But I wanted to kind of quickly do that and then get into the kind of case studies part of the presentation. Why case studies? Well, as I said, recently we've started to research case studies as an alternative publishing model for us. We have plenty of different journals, we have plenty of books. Case studies we're seeing as a kind of new venture potentially. And many of you will be aware of case studies, the case study teaching method, maybe the PBL, the problem-based learning method. And some of you may be familiar with kind of famous case study providers like Harvard Business Cases, for example. But we're keen to explore whether we can facilitate a similar kind of case study publishing platform or publishing option within the STEM fields originally, and then potentially rolling them out to other fields as well. So we're starting with engineering, which is why it's me talking to you today. But we are hoping to move into medical, to veterinary, as many areas as we can, but we're starting with engineering. I'm going to talk to you a bit about why we've been doing a lot of research over a couple of years in focus groups with academics. We've been doing condensed research, we've been doing questionnaire research, and so we're really keen to explore the potential here, and we think we can come up with a valuable resource for the engineering teaching community. And I'm going to talk through some of the observations, and I'm really interested to whether this resonates with you, especially if you're actively teaching students. I'm not sure whether people on the call are teaching engineering students. But I'm interested sort of more broadly as educators, those of you who are teachers, whether what I'm saying kind of aligns with your experiences and your own thoughts on this kind of teaching method. So these are some quotes from some of the focus groups that we held with international academics, and I'll read them out. I haven't memorized them, but you have to use case studies in your teaching so students get the idea that whatever they're learning in the textbook has some relevance with industries. Otherwise, in so many instances, students feel we learn so many things, but we don't know where it's applied to the industry. Or the reverse of that, the industry says to us, we have so many problems, but the students are not capable of understanding that problem. So to avoid this kind of situation, we have to make a bridge between industry and academia, introducing small case studies into our daily teaching. Another quote here: the most effective thing when we see that most of the learning, when we see the best feedback from students on the courses, is where these use cases and case studies actually trigger the students to say, hey, this is fun, and they engage in it more and they spend more time on it. So these are just a few of the kind of parts of the conversation we were having with academics when we started to ask them about whether they were interested in case studies and what the benefits they saw. So generally speaking, this active research approach, academics have been telling us that they see numerous benefits for students. As I've mentioned in the questionnaire, it really bridges that divide between the theoretical concepts in the textbooks in the classroom and that practical implementation of this knowledge in the field, on the job site or in a lab. Case studies can help demonstrate to a young learner how scientific principles solve actual real-world problems, and they can potentially bring a global dimension, for students who may go and get jobs internationally. The use of cases can aid the development of key skills, teamwork skills, critical and analytical thinking skills, communication, professional judgment. We have lots of conversations around the use of case studies in ethical scenarios with the engineering faculty that we spoke to. And fundamentally, we do believe that the case studies can help prepare students for industry challenges that they'll face post-graduation. And one of the quotes alluded to there, we heard time and time again that often industry partners are coming to university partners and saying that there are gaps in the graduate's knowledge, and that the case studies can really kind of plug these gaps with real world examples, often developed alongside the industry partners that the university are moving graduates into. So overall, there is existing research, and I've cited a paper there which shows that use of case study teaching methods, use of problem-based learning methods, improve engagement, they're motivational, that they improve the retention of some of the more technical content that in particular engineering students happen to learn, and they improve performance and feedback students giving about the classes they're being taught. I've been more quotes from our focus groups here, and sort of going to talk a bit more about benefits for faculty as we see them and what we picked up in our research. But it's that business of actually seeing what people do in practice, unpicking it, then replaying it back, having done a little bit of work. Bring that to the students, bringing that to the students' live cases. I found extremely helpful to have a room of brains collectively thinking about possible solutions, or redefining or understanding that challenge in a different light to help you think a little bit differently. And then what the students see is me teaching, me thinking along with them. So I wonder, many of you may be kind of engaging with what might be considered a case study, without really giving it a second thought. Perhaps, if you're publishing journal papers in technical fields, maybe your paper is informed by real industry and could be considered a kind of case study. Maybe you've developed some cases for your class. Maybe you have guest speakers from industry who come in and give lectures, and maybe actually what they're really doing is kind of presenting a case in a 1 or 2 hour session with the students, and that could be written up, perhaps developed into a kind of a resource for other educators. Some of the benefits that we picked up for faculty when using case study teaching methods, potentially another kind of tool in your armory, and I mentioned on the previous slide, that students have been shown to develop deeper understanding of some of the more complex materials when taught using cases. I would like to think that by employing a kind of a different approach, you're building your toolkit as an educator. If you're developing case studies or using other people's case studies, you're bringing a kind of alternate teaching method to the classroom, and again, kind of building towards that greater attention, student engagement, and then feedback loop of positive comments and engagement from your students. I am from a publisher, so my motivation here is to encourage people to work with us to publish cases. But much like a textbook, publishing cases can be seen to be giving back to the community. It can raise your profile amongst your peers, your credibility. Case studies are citable, so you're building a kind of an online citation profile as well. They're also compatible with a variety of different delivery methods, hybrid options, distance learning, flipped classrooms, things like that. Teaching with cases also open up a number of different assessment options, written or oral assessments, group or individual, multi-stage, even role-based assessments. And I've said this variety creates a more dynamic and exciting learning environment. We heard that time and time again in our focus groups, and contributes to overall that kind of positive feedback. And we're hoping that if we can publish case studies for you alongside teaching notes, which I'm going to talk about shortly, we're going to save you time eventually. Much like picking up a textbook and teaching from it. If the materials are well developed, you can add your own flavour to it, but there's a resource there that hopefully saves you time. So through our conversations, we've started to build a picture of the structure we think we would like to see for case studies, publish them. And I'm very interested in, I think, probably coming back to this slide and the one after this on teaching notes, having a look at it with the group and seeing whether people agree, seeing whether people can add gaps here or make suggestions on reworking this according to their own experiences and requirements. So I'll just run through this. So the title, obviously, title with the authors, the affiliation, and consider kind of keywords. I think this applies to books as well and journal papers. The title is key. It's top and front and center, and it needs to be discoverable. When somebody is looking for something online, think of the keywords they're putting in, think of what you would put in if you were looking for that particular piece. The abstract, again, the overview of the case study, you need to be indicating the technical level, who the audience is, and again, consider that it's going to be in front of a paywall, so it's going to be the first encounter. It's only going to be a few hundred words, so get the key information in there. Learning outcomes and objectives. What's this case study going to do for the student? What is it that the person who's written it is asking of them? What skills are they going to develop? What are their outcomes going to be at the end of this once they've done the work, they've got the case in front of them? The case statement's really the body of the case. It's the main content. It should include all the necessary information that the student needs to read and absorb in order to meet the objectives that the author of the case is setting. There's no kind of set structure for this. It's really case by case basis. It depends on the case. You'll have some background, you're gonna have some technical data potentially. In the engineering fields, you may have some results, you may have some sort of technical data or materials. You may include some kind of key principles, kind of pedagogical framework, which is being used to deliver this case. There may be some constraints, if it's a kind of a problem-based case, maybe it's an environmental consideration, maybe there are safety issues to consider, maybe there's a budgetary issue that, that's the problem as part of this case study that it's testing the students, depending on the learning outcomes. You may link to simulations, diagrams, supplying to include calculations. It's really kind of whatever you need to include, it should be in there. We're thinking of the majority of the cases that we publish will be between 2,000 and 5,000 words. So there's a fair bit of flex there in terms of what you would need to include. We think discussion questions are going to be key to these. These are supposed to be a resource for educators, providing that the discussion question can act as a signpost, and it can contribute to the kind of formal assessment that the educator can use, maybe as even as an exam question or just a kind of a group exercise. Suggestions within that and in the teaching note for this kind of resource that I'll outline in a second. And then finally, just some further reading references, self-explanatory, that you can kind of expand numerous materials, your test results, if applicable, could be in there as well. Teaching notes. So we really think that a case study is only going to be as effective as the teaching notes that accompany it. It's essential to help instructors pick up a case and use it in the classroom context. And they should really provide a resource and enough knowledge to deepen the educator's understanding of the case so they can use it effectively. Providing suggestions of how to teach the case, help them make the most of the opportunity for using that case in the classroom. So this is the kind of structure that we've come up with based on kind of looking at existing teaching notes mainly within the business sector, but we're trying to sort of make this more STEM applicable. Beginning with a brief description of what the case is about and the context in which it's all set, an outline of the learning and teaching objectives, which could well differ from what was in the case study of the student-facing option. The teaching objectives for the educator, I expect to be different slightly. I mean, certainly mirroring what's on the student-facing version, but perhaps more detailed, perhaps more technical in terms of the possible outcomes on the educator side. Again, the target audience, I think guidance is critical on the level. Is this a kind of undergraduate level, or is this a more advanced case study, which you really only be suitable for kind of graduate master's level students? The classes, the modules, as we say in the UK, that these can be used on, that's a really important signposting. And I think that's something that's going to be flagged up front and center when we publish these as to direct the potential users. Information on pedagogical approaches, how the teacher is going to use this case study to reach the teaching objectives that are set at the top of the case. Consider, how it's going to be delivered in person. I mentioned hybrid approaches. I mentioned flipped classrooms, distance learning, all that kind of information and suggestion and guidance needs to be included in the case study as well. Potential solutions, guidance for the discussion questions. Again, saving instructors time, but also the effectiveness of a case study kind of depends, I think, from the conclusion. Students get the most of it when they kind of see the journey, they see the outcome, and they learn from that. So that, in a way, is kind of a big reveal potentially from the educator once the kind of case has been wrapped up. And then background information, further reading, and that could be further reading for the educator in terms of maybe the pedagogical approaches. Might not necessarily in an engineering case be directing the reader to engineering literature. It might be directing towards educational literature. So as I've said, we're currently at the very early stages of a journey towards what we hope will result in an online platform of hundreds of quality peer-reviewed case studies and teaching notes covering the 13 key engineering topics that we publish in within Turner and Francis. The idea of these is to help students understand the application of their engineering concepts in industry and deepen the students' practical understanding, and we hope increase their employability opportunities. We want to offer specially commissioned case studies and teaching notes directly related to the core engineering course modules and demonstrate how the concepts learned in the classroom apply to the real world, and providing instructors with time-saving teaching tools to effectively engage their students. And where possible, we're hoping to highlight throughout this the relevance of the case to the UN sustainability goals. That's an important thing for us to flag. As I said, we're currently at very early stages of development. We're looking for partners, we're looking for authors, we're looking for feedback on some of our assumptions, which are based on some of the research we've done. And so if there's interest in collaborating on this new venture that we're embarking on, please do reach out to us. As I say, we're starting with engineering, but we hope, if it's successful, to roll this out into a variety of different areas. That wraps it up from me. That's my email address, our website. Thank you very much. I'll take any questions on any of that publishing process, and I'm keen, as I say, to kind of get feedback and maybe go back and look at some of the structure stuff on cases of people have comments to me. Thank you.
I want to acknowledge the fact that we have 14 participants online. So I invite you to either unmute yourselves and let us know about your questions, or type them into chat and I'll read them out loud if you're participating online.
Thanks. Have any questions?
You're thinking about it. I have thoughts, but I feel like this isn't like maybe in the future, this would be something social science oriented, which is totally, so I see the engineering part of this right now. But I've been really leaning into case studies for my social problems class. It's a giant class, lots of engineering, like 500 students every semester. And so I'm really leaning into case studies, but I'm really leaning into finding really interesting podcast episodes and then helping students analyze those to figure out like how, like there's the example of the woman who stole hundreds of babies in Kentucky, and I can't remember her name right now. It's very similar to a student's name, and I don't want to make them mix up, but essentially like she just started taking people's babies and selling them across the whole country, and she would advertise them as like, do you want a baby for Christmas? She would like steal kids out of yards from poor moms. Or she had all of these doctors and nurses and police officers on her payroll. She was selling the babies for about $200,000. At the time, that would have been how much that money was worth. So, and she would all the mothers would before their babies died that night, but their babies are actually going into this warehouse. And it gets more and more dark, because as you start accumulating children for profit, you aren't treating them as children anymore. So it gets pretty dark. But like, I'm going to open up social problems with that. And so I was wondering about like this with the written case studies, students seem to be more accepting of like podcast formats and those kinds of things. And so I was wondering if you're planning on having that in any of the resources.
Yeah, we would love to have those kind of elements. We'd love to have video. We would love to have podcast is a great suggestion. And I think especially for the social sciences, that's going to run really well. I think the engineering side of things, I guess, I guess it would work, conversations between engineers around certain. Maybe it's the softer skills, though, it's probably leaning into the social science skills where those are going to be more applicable to engineers, the management side of things, the ethical considerations.
Yeah.
The kind of conversation between people from industry, maybe I could see like a scenario where you have an industry partner and an academic discussing these things, recorded as a podcast. Yeah, that would work.
Like-
And certainly we're keen on that, but I think, we are a traditional publisher, so everything that we do at the moment starts with the written word. So
Right.
that's the kind of, that's the jumping off point for us.
I think students like having the written word to go back to.
Yeah.
But to get into something, they like having something audible or video, but not very long unless it's a podcast. I'll go for a little bit longer, I find. Are you finding that too? Yeah,
I guess, yeah, one of the challenges for publishers at the moment is the TikTok generation. How do we engage with that?
100%. We're also struggling with that.
I'm interested in the review process. So from your point of view, do you still go through a peer review process to accept case studies just like you do from books, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we want to mark our engineering case studies with a quality stamp. I think what we're looking to do is to set up a structure where we have section editors. So we have a subject, because I mentioned we have 13 different engineering subjects. Our thinking is that at the head of each one, we have almost like a journal editor, but we have a sub editor who works with the case study authors to vet the quality alongside us. And so, I mean, I think we're primarily interested in the effectiveness of the case, so we're going to potentially talk to one or two educators and build up a pool. It's going to be a kind of, would you use this in a class kind of scenario? So fairly, but there's a technical element to it, but it's more about, is somebody going to pick this up and use it? So we want usage. We don't want to sat there and not use. So I'd say it's more market research at that point rather than kind of a peer review in terms of the paper would be multiple pieces for a journal. Yeah, go ahead.
For engineering, many of the case studies can be related to something that has happened in industry.
Yeah.
What is your expectations in terms of clearing that with the company who's the source of the information? Do you expect to have anonymous information, or can we say this happened to Boeing?
I
Have
think,
some examples, or this happened at, Rolls-Royce or?
I think we would love to be able to do that. I think, and that's something that we as publishers have to navigate with our book publications as well, in terms of, I don't, it's a positive case study. I don't think you're gonna have a problem. Having said that, major negative engineering incidents become public very quickly. And there is an existing product which it markets itself as a case studies resource, but it's really kind of looking at disasters, plane crashes, things like that. And they're out there, they do exist, and as I say, they're open public. So I think we want buy-in from industry. I think, given our background in collaborating with higher education institutions, the way to industry for us is probably going to be through collaborating with the higher education institutions that have those links already. But we do publish professionals, we do work with adjuncts to publish their content as textbooks. So, yeah, I think we'll have to just navigate that for the publisher ourselves. But there's strength to having. We want these case studies to be real world. We talked a lot in our focus groups about the kind of. I remember just a quote from the guy saying, "You don't want sci-fi case studies. It needs to be real, because otherwise it's just not as effective and the students don't like it."
So basically, we want the full collaboration of the source of the example. We are not going to anonymize the source. So that's you're leaning towards that.
I think so, yeah. I think so. Sorry, I'm a definitive answer, but I think it's more effective.
Because that's the premise of like when how do you find the subjects, to make sure that if we're writing about a company, they will be willing to share information and data and have that as an example to be published.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge. Yeah, I think, you can come up with potentially agreements with companies about how things are written.
At the other end of the spectrum, if we're thinking about case studies in nursing, pharmacy, that's where you would definitely want to anonymize
Of course,
the
yeah,
information. So
yeah, ethical issues around anonymity and people out.
That's my area too. We've got a grant submitted right now to implement doing our therapy in the form of journals with wounded military. And we're interested in developing a book exactly like this, detailing the case study,
Mm.
but producing a guide for wounded military to utilize visual journaling as a means of our therapy and dealing with their readjustment to life and their previous experiences. So that's why I'm here, interested in this. It's in the arts area, so my apologies to my engineering colleagues here.
That sounds fun.
It's something that we are very interested in.
Yeah.
Possibly working with you. By the way, thank you for the dividends or the royalties check I received from you a couple weeks ago.
Oh, good. Glad you got that.
we timed it already.
I mean, I should say, actually, I talked in the presentation about kind of building towards a platform, but Christina and I have had various conversations around case study books. And as I said, we're traditional publishers, so the written word is what we do. So we are very much interested in collections of cases on particular topics. And I think the way I would see that evolving with the teaching note would be the kind of digital offering. We would then provide, the book includes some case studies, and the teaching note would then be online for those educators who decide to grab those cases rather than a classroom context.
So are you thinking, I mean, is this gonna be purely online, but you're talking about having a text, so would it be like a whole sampler of case studies that you would assign your students? Like you would say, okay, we're gonna do this case study, or would you like work with you to say, I want to print these case studies in like a sampler or something?
So the print model, it would be a book and an ebook, so you would be able to grab that case digitally.
Okay.
It's part of an ebook. They would be thematically organized. For the online product, they're all online. They would all be accessible online and individually downloadable. So yeah, I think the book is a kind of intermediary. And I don't think we would expect to sell many of the books. I think there would probably be a library purchase. And then you would be accessing through the Purdue Library to get whatever case you wanted.
Okay, so you're not picturing like students buying 4 case studies independently for
I
the
don't think so.
semester? Okay,
I don't think the market for this is the students. I think it's the educators and it's the institutions who would, faculty would go through, we're teaching using a case study method. And here's this resource of hundreds of case studies. Can we get access to it? So it's an institutional purchase. I think it's the commercial model.
makes
So
sense.
you as faculty would just kind of plug in your keywords to the university library and hopefully these cases will come up.
Oh, just like journal article.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
Yeah, that's the hope.
I think that we're used to doing that, trying to
Yeah.
find stuff on our library website.
There is actually online. I mean, if I can flick back. I'm curious as to what I was saying around the structure of the case study. Whether it makes sense. And then also the structure of the teaching note and whether people kind of generally agree that the teaching note is an essential feature. Making the case study effective.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes you find an interesting case, man, I don't really know what I could do with this in my class or what exactly I could guide my students through, maybe one idea, but I think this would be so much, especially for people who are just teaching. Or just starting to teach, sorry.
So I mean, I think for us then, Christina mentioned the review process, perhaps. We need to focus on this as the kind of the thing to develop.
Yeah.
Get that kind of thing, get this document reviewed alongside the case.
you may want to also go into some depth on the assessment pieces with this, so you had a block for that, but I think you may need some specific teaching notes really in relation to assessment.
Mhm.
The previous slide, I think, had an assessment block on there. Well, somewhere, it's in the pedagogical pieces, but
That's what I thought too, yeah.
I think that sharing some various kinds of assessment tools or examples, worksheets, check sheets, maybe get some actual pieces to guide the instructors' collection of data for what the students have learned from this might be helpful.
Mm.
Test questions if there's such a thing. So it's more of a tool manual.
Thank you very much.
We do have someone in the chat who says that I would also appreciate teaching notes accompanying this case study.
Thank you, whoever that was.
Jonathan?
Thank you, Jonathan.
Are those teaching notes going to be written by the author or by someone who read that work and looked at it from a teaching perspective? The reason I'm saying this, there has always been a gap between the discourse that is used by people who do extensive research versus the discourse that is used by teachers. That gap is eternal. Unless we find a way around it. Sometimes when people report their case studies, research findings, they continue to use the same language that they're used to.
Yeah,
But teachers or practitioners do not necessarily love that language. That's not the language that they use when they apply their findings to teaching. So I'm looking at it from a language perspective.
Yeah.
Are you going to simplify the language? Are you going to adopt the practitioner language? The transition from that like academic, purely research language to the pedagogical language, how is that going to happen?
yeah, no, I think that's a really important point, and I think primarily the people we've been speaking to are teachers, many of them research active, but that point about how the research level content of the papers, the conference papers that are presented, because, you know, teacher may come across that and say this has super educational implications that I can take and distill and present, pre-package. So I guess the answer to the question is, our role is to make sure that that happens. And you know, we used to kind of encouraging authors to write in a certain way. We may have to partner people. We may have to say this person's done the research, they've written on the paper, but this teacher is coming to us saying the research in this paper can be converted to a case study. Some people may get sensitive about that being reworded. So yeah, I think that's potentially one of our roles within this is to make that more presentable for classroom context.
Yeah, build on that idea. That's really critical. And that was sort of a preface to the comment I made earlier about assessment, because the assumption is you know how to assess your student's work. That's not always the case. So in terms of building on your point, I think including some sample, even classroom activities, have your students do a quick piece of research and then discuss their research, or set up a problem and have them collaborate on it, do some of the actually incorporate some of the skills that you had listed before, or some of the activities that the field uses on a micro basis inside the classroom. And then after they do this, present their product and then deconstruct this. Let's critique this. What something you missed, or, and this is just by way of giving the instructor a catalog of possible ways of introducing the main feature of the case study, and different ways, because you don't want to go one way to solve this. There has to be multiple solutions, and then possibly have the students do an array. Could we try it from this way? Here's what we found. What if we tried a different way? Might we find different things, or might we find something that supports what we found earlier? And I think that might help instructors to get more out of this. But I think ideally, it will give students more ways into the thinking and developing the skills that you're trying to capture in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the teaching note, we've talked about is the core key to this. The case study may well be very short. The teaching note can be packed full of useful tools. And I think we envision a kind of a feedback loop where we know who the users are with the case studies, and we go back to them in year 2 and say, how are you using this? How can we improve the teaching note? How do we update the teaching note? Are you willing to share your method of working with this?
Have an evergreen method of improving the publication that way.
That's cool.
Yeah, that would be ideal.
If you're doing it online, revisions and other things are pretty simple.
Yeah, absolutely. You do just a new version.
We have a comment online from Jonathan Brooks who says, it might make sense to put the discussion questions before presenting the outcome of the case. So in that way, the students can come up with their own recommendations or solutions before they read what actually happened.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. So just
I'm sorry. I'm just thinking about like the potential of this project, at least in the College of Engineering. So we have the School of Engineering Education within the College of Engineering. So I can see like case studies could come from the individual departments. And the teaching notes can be out of collaboration between the School of Engineering Education and the individual departments, and even with the College of Education for that matter. So.
Yeah, walking here, I was looking at the poster or the big thing about the whitest paint ever. And then that could be a case, right? Like, how did you create the whitest paint ever? And that's not a disaster. But something that that students would be interested in learning about. Because I'm sure there was lots of trial and error there before you got to it.
Yeah, this is a really interesting point. Like going back to what you were saying about, top researchers not necessarily being able to communicate that high level content to undergraduates. And how do we facilitate that? Collaborating with the engineering education team. It seems like a very sensible thing. So does that kind of team exist within other faculties? The kind of, you've got like a set of engineering education, like a subgroup. Have that within, forgotten your.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm with the new School of Design, Art and Performance. So I'm actually an art educator, but I'm an administrator and I've been involved with teaching.
Is that a unique thing to any other?
Education is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, their mission is to figure out better ways, most effective ways how to teach engineering, and that spans all engineering disciplines. I imagine there are many collaborations already going on, but we could definitely have some sort of a matchmaking opportunity where we say, hey, we have a call-out for case studies. You would get help from engineering education to define the learning outcomes and the assessment. Let's talk about like what would be good topics. So that's something that can definitely happen.
For everywhere else, it's just the people who are really interested in education, like the pedagogy of teaching the discipline. And then we would do a lot of work with CIE and the Center for Instructional Excellence and those kinds of things.
Right.
Yeah.
But from my point of view, as we're interested more in compiling these in the book, do you see an opportunity to invite colleagues from other universities to contribute to a volume of case studies that somebody at Purdue would edit?
Volume 2, I mean, a little facetious there, but I think maybe starting here to work out the bumps and maybe have something unique to Purdue University in engineering. I think that to me is very exciting right off the bat. And then as this volume grows, there might be a range for looking at other institutions, but then also expanding it into specialized kinds of case studies, if that makes any sense. So that you have layers to this and almost an umbrella as it starts to spread out and go different directions. Because I think that was in the normal chain of development. I think you're going to find that's going to happen with this. There are going to be some case studies that don't quite fit in the model we got here, but you don't want to throw them away. So what do? We start archiving those and all of a sudden you've got 10 studies. Okay, we got another volume or something like this. So I think that's why I said part 2.
I think that's, yes.
I think like a best Purdue case, like Purdue Innovations and just case studies on Purdue Innovations. 'Cause we have so many with the University of Innovation. That'd be so cool. People would buy that just to see what each of the things Purdue's done.
That's the key.
Yeah.
Sets us apart as staking a claim in this area in a specific kind of way.
Yeah, great.
But I think collaborating is good too.
Have you looked at it internationally too?
Yeah, so
The teaching is
Yeah,
heavily
of
cultural
of
and
course,
depends on
groups.
the infrastructure that we're talking about. Teaching in the US is different from teaching in blah blah countries, right?
Yeah.
How are those like case studies going to transfer to multiple settings and contexts? And some of the limitations, of course, every case study comes with affordances. And those affordances can be applicable to various degrees to different settings. So context is important when we talk about teaching and how are you going to address that aspect of it, maybe including an international voice, right? This is one way of teaching this in the US context, but applied to a different context, you might want to make compromises, right? Or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, we're a global publisher, so I mean, and the research that we did, the focus groups we did, we had academics and teachers from India, Greece, Slovakia, the UK, US, Australia. It was very much a global series of conversations. And, you know, that kind of challenge we face with any of our content that we put out there, any of our textbook content, you know, the way that things are done taught in the US isn't necessarily, you know, translate to the UK or India or anywhere else. So it's something that we have to acknowledge. And I think you could potentially build that into the teaching note. And again, you can build that into the kind of review process. And I'm not against doing regional specific case studies, you know, we're looking at this from a kind of international perspective. So, you know, where are our core markets for our content? It's US, it's Northern Europe, it's Asia, India, you know, so we'd be very keen to collaborate to publish case studies from Indian specific industry examples within engineering or Chinese or wherever. So, and I think, you know, over time, we'll develop a better understanding of pedagogical approaches in these regions as well, and how we need to adapt actually, and you know, we can supplement because a lot of this eventually will be online. We can supplement with a Chinese edition teaching note perhaps, or
I mean, with the direction that teaching practices are taking, given the advances in cutting edge AI and sort of AI is now as a matter of equity. Not every context has equal access to AI infrastructure. So when talking about teaching, implications of any case study context should be primary concern.
yeah, I mean, in terms of commercial models, we have local offices who do specific arrangements with local higher education institutes, making things affordable or coming up with different options. Yeah, we want this to be inclusive, we want it to be diverse, we want it to be accessible.
We teach engineering very differently in different regions.
Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah.
That's really cool. I have a lot of questions about that.
I did get your, what department are you from, sorry?
Curriculum and Instruction, College of Education. Yeah, I mean, I'm originally Persian and I have this unconscious way of comparing my own teaching background with what I'm seeing currently here from a pedagogical perspective. Obviously, back in my home country, Iran, most of the things are basically theory due to lack of like lab infrastructure.
Right.
So one way of teaching engineering in Iran, obviously given the limitations, is to heavily focus on theory. When you see students come here to Purdue, you see that they have a good grasp on the theory, but when it comes to putting that theory into practice, they're far behind compared to students who grew up here,
Mm.
right? So engineering education is mainly, not mainly, it's largely a function of the infrastructure that you have and that one, like here in the US, when we talk about theory. Obviously, we have lab and infrastructure to implement that theory, but that's not necessarily the case in other contexts, settings like Iran.
Yeah. I mean, I think from our perspective, as a publisher of cases, we will want to use knowledge like that to adapt.
Yeah.
And to test market viability in the region, to consult with educators to get the feedback, to make
Yeah.
the product better, make it more applicable in different markets.
Thank you everyone for participating today. Thank you also to our participants online. And most of all, thank you, Ed, for taking the time from your conference days to come and talk to us.
Thank you.
Very, very exciting opportunity. And I hope we'll get some, some case studies and some ideas out of this to take forward towards completion.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for the engagement. It's been really helpful. This feedback's invaluable. So
Those are really good projects, like really promising projects. Yeah,
Yeah.
especially as we move away from normal textbooks and, yeah.
I'm loving the enthusiasm for it. So I'm going to take that back and communicate it to our team and watch the space.
Yeah,
Fantastic. Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Along with each one of you, see if you have any idea you'd like to take forward, and I'm happy to assist you in the journey from idea to ISBN or case study.